Howdy folks, I'm Michael J. Gormley, but y'all can feel free to call me Gorm. I'm an English professor at Quinsigamond Community College in Massachusetts. My research and teaching focus on tracking in literature, nonlinear temporality, the intersections of mathematics and science with the humanities, and nerdy pop culture stuff, especially Star Wars. This paper assembles analyses appearing in my first book, The End of the Anthropocene, Ecocriticism, the Universal Ecosystem, and the Astropocene. Using ecocriticism and modern science fiction, I interrogate what it means to be human when our species lives in extraterrestrial environments. The literary readings assess the Anthropocene to characterize the sort of action that will end this epic and begin the next. If you're interested, The End of the Anthropocene is expected to drop just before the conference, and I've got a discount code for you. Hopefully, that helps balance the book promotion this presentation ultimately is. Anyways, thanks for watching. This is The Astropocene is Mathematical and Fleshy, Biotic Humans in Extraplanetary Environs. Regaining consciousness alone on Mars, Mark Watney's first crisis in Andy Weir's The Martian is that his suit is breached by the communications antenna that slams into him as the crew evacuates the planet during a storm. His suit and body punctured, quote, "The copious amount of blood from Watney's wound trickled down toward the hole. As the blood reached the site of the breach, the water in it quickly evaporated from the airflow and low pressure, leaving a gunky residue behind. More blood came in behind it and was also reduced to gunk," unquote. Landing face down torqued the antenna against the hole in the suit. The coagulate gunk and position combined to form a seal good enough for the suit to manage the pressure drop. Watney explains that his suit's life support is most limited by its ability to filter CO2. While unconscious, those filters were spent, so the suit went into emergency mode, venting air to Mars and backfilling with nitrogen, which also runs out. The only thing left to pump into the suit to maintain atmospheric conditions was O2. Watney notes the irony of a Terran dying on Mars from too much oxygen in a punctured spacesuit. Earthly atmospheric conditions are incredibly fragile elsewhere in the universal ecosystem, even considering how disrupted our earthly atmosphere is in the Anthropocene. Science fiction tends to gather this sort of allegorical relation to our anthropogenic ecological dissonances. Instead of superimposing Mars onto Earth, though, I favor an axiomatic ecocritical reading that assesses literary setting as actual eco-realistic nature. After all, we are going to the red planet. Mars is one of the novel otherworldly environs in which humanness will imminently circulate. In such extraplanetary ecosystems, we become stark ecometonymies, bodies extending from the contours of our home planet through dissonant integration with otherworldly environs. Thus, our biotic identity, that identity described by our relation to other living organisms, also implies abiotic factors like atmospheric composition and pressure, as well as gravity. With some reciprocating motion and an expansion of scientific literacy, ecocriticism is a paradigmatic technology for characterizing the end of the Anthropocene and curating the epoch after. Imbuing first and second wave ecocriticism with reciprocating motion manifests a novel ecocritical method capable of predictive claims about humanity's biotic and cultural identity as the species spreads beyond Earth. In short, extending second-wave ecocriticism's concern with scientific literacy beyond the environmental sciences and into the universal ecosystem finds theoretical physics best describes the environment. Ecocriticism addresses eco-realistic science fiction texts that can act as extraplanetary nature narratives in first-wave ecocriticism. Always attuned to ecocriticism's interdisciplinary responsibilities, the reciprocating ecocritical method must prevent the slippage of scientific terms into metaphoric approximations that would negate the authority of its predictive claims. Applying Perini's description of ecocriticism as, quote, a re-engagement with realism, with the actual universe of rocks, trees, and rivers that lies behind the wilderness of signs, unquote, prioritizes hard science fiction narratives on real planets whose ecology is well understood. Setting the waves of ecocriticism in reciprocating motion creates a recursive reference for informing each and predicts the contours of human interaction with other planets to impact the form such relations take. I make use of two particular SF iterations to identify texts suiting the reciprocating ecocritical method, enmeshing two of Haraway's SF tentacles, science fiction and science fact. This curates a cross-section of SF that prioritizes modern texts, placing a premium on scientific accuracy to maintain a hypothetical viability while imagining human futures. Call it science fact fiction. I prioritize fact only for a moment because they must be scientific facts for this method. Likened as SF, I always mean both fact and fiction. Science fact fiction stories are eco-realistic, beholden to the scientific realities of our universe to ruminate on human experience. By this, we can read Watney on Mars as a human future, a biotic self, a Terran cyborg in Martian wilds, what Haraway would describe as, quote, mathematical and fleshly, unquote. Although I prefer the more visceral fleshy over fleshly, for what we look at here is not flesh-like, but actual human material. This paper interrogates our species in two ecocritical contexts, as biotic bodies in the red dirt of Mars and as organisms in spatiotemporal nature. Examining how biotic human character in otherworldly wilds is entangled in dirt, bacteria, entropy, and general relativity frames an eco-ethical ontology for ending the Anthropocene. To survive long enough to be rescued, Watney converts his living space from a technological human habitat to a simulated Earth system. Watney only brought enough Earth soil to run his botany experiments, small-scale assessments of the viability of Martian soil, and now must make more. Watney explains, quote, Martian soil has the basic building blocks needed for plant growth, but there's a lot of stuff going on in Earth soil that Mars soil doesn't have, even when it's placed in an Earth atmosphere and given plenty of water. Bacterial activity, certain nutrients provided by animal life, etc., none of that is happening on Mars, unquote. To provide the necessary bacteria and fertilizing biomatter to the lifeless Martian soil, Watney rehydrates the desiccated waste and all the while adds his own manure. He mixes the compost into the Martian soil, finishing by sprinkling the Earth soil on top because, quote, there are dozens of species of bacteria living in Earth soil, and they're critical to plant growth. Unquote. He lets the bacteria multiply and make earthly the soil. Terraforming Martian soil with his waste, Watney remarks that the bacteria introduced by using this night soil do not cause disease. Quote, the only pathogens in this waste are the ones I already have. Unquote. Instead, bacteria are critical kin, digesting and nutrifying plants to survive with and as interplanetary organisms. While they interact with their surroundings by decay, everywhere in the simulated Earth system, they are beneficial and promoted. In the HAB, the bacteria are never out of place in their environs, always acting as they are and securing natural processes. They decay soil components so that plants may grow, just as they break down potatoes in Watney's gut for his survival. They exit Watney and enter the soil. They are eaten by Watney, but never consumed, rather reintegrated into another biotic location and process. Watney simulates the Earth system's interrelated processes by recognizing the critical kin and kin-making of bacteria from his microbiome. Watney's biotic relation to Earth is simplified and intensified, which in the HAB is also an ecometonymic description of Earth and Mars in the universal ecosystem. How he stores his harvest, though, shifts the character of his biotic relation to Mars to something asynchronous with the late-stage Anthropocene. Left in the HAB or rover, the potatoes would rot in the warm, pressurized environment long before he could consume them. Instead, he does, quote, something that wouldn't work all that well on Earth. Throw them outside. Most of the water will be sucked out by the near vacuum. What's left will freeze solid. Any bacteria planning to rot my taters will die screaming, unquote. Incorporating the natural Martian environment to halt decay, Watney enters a fascinating ecosystem in which Mars simultaneously denies and preserves his, quote, simulated complex global ecosystem, unquote. With this action, Watney reciprocally invokes the Earth and Martian ecosystems. Mars envelops the potatoes, subsuming the natural decay inherently maintaining Earth systems. This in turn bolsters Watney and his bacterial kin's survival in the simulated Earth system. The Earth system now perpetuates by the oppositional function of the larger Martian ecology that has until now consumed or resisted Watney's, quote, circle of nature, unquote. This act is akin to Watney's initiating circumstance, where the Martian atmosphere evaporated the water in his blood, sealing his suit. Incorporating the Martian landscape to halt entropic decay and promote his body, Watney includes the unaltered Martian environment to halt and promote an earthly ecosystem, biotically integrating with another planet. And with this, or some self-same act, the Anthropocene ends. The Astropocene begins. When humanity is no longer mandatorily bound to the blue planet on which we evolved, when other planets do not refuse us, we begin the next Terran epoch. By the end of the Anthropocene, humans acquire unprecedented control over Earth's ecology. In the Astropocene, we live with and in extraplanetary environs. Biotic identity is formed by interrelation with unprecedented physical locations and resources, exerting their novel abiotic contours on Terran bodies. Ecocriticism must extend its scientific literacy to cultivate ecoethical interrelation for ending the Anthropocene and initiating the Astropocene. To predict and shape the next geological epoch, ecocriticism must include physics in its vision of nature. Again, borrowing Haraway's notion, ecocriticism needs to become mathematical and fleshly, for that is what we will be in the universal ecosystem. Unifying the biotic and abiotic factors contouring identity in extraplanetary environs, Watney bodily experiences entropy. Watney's use of the radioisotope thermonuclear generator that powered the crew's landing craft is a study in biotically relating to entropy, and he both finds it, quote, nice to see thermodynamics being well behaved, unquote, and specifically curses entropy. The decay of plutonium in the RTG radiates heat that is transferred to the air molecules in the rover, increasing the entropy of the external system to simulate earthly climate. The heat energy produced is too much for Watney. He detaches a piece of the rover's insulation to astropically invoke the Martian temperature to balance the extreme heat generated. Without the RTG, the rover's heater would drain too much power for him to travel as quickly as he needs. Originally, Watney tried using his own body heat to create a thermodynamic equilibrium between his body and the rover. The rover has top-notch insulation, best on Earth, but Watney's plan quickly gets outstripped by the rover's thermodynamic connection to the Martian atmosphere. Watney curses, quote, all my brilliant plans foiled by thermodynamics. Damn you, entropy, unquote. Watney frequently asserts that Mars is trying to kill him, which it is, but no more than Earth is trying to kill you. Natural selection occurs everywhere. But here he traces his biotic relation to physical, natural law. Watney is biotically entrenched in the universal ecosystem, which appears most consistent when described as fundamental physical laws. Watney is now less concerned with the immediate planetary system and is biotically interacting with entropy, with the universal ecosystem. Entropy describes biotic relations that define humanity in the universal ecosystem as a relation to space-time itself. Beyond a description of energy, entropy describes a thermodynamic arrow of time. Hawking states, quote, the increase of disorder or entropy with time is one example of what is called an arrow of time, something that distinguishes the past from the future, giving a direction to time, unquote. One can think of the progression of entropy as a glass falling off a table, moving through space-time, and shattering on the floor. In breaking, the glass has become less bound and rigid in form, increasing in disorder, in entropy. We never see it run in the opposite direction. By ecocritical applications of physics to literature, we are able to interrogate our imminent biotic relation to space-time before we inhabit the universal ecosystem. The physics of space-time is largely the purview of general relativity and subsequent derivations. General relativity predicts both the spatiotemporal fabric of reality and gravity's ability to warp it, while calculations based on Einstein's equations even predict the plausibility of wormholes existing in the universe. Published in 1915, general relativity has spent over a century shaping scientific and cultural relations to space-time. The theory led to myriad explanations of the universal ecosystem's contours, while literature and film deploy its frameworks to explore humanness. Almost 100 years to the day after general relativity's publication, the predicted effects of gravity on spacetime are detected. In late 2015, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, nailed it, detects ripples in spacetime emanating out from the collision of two black holes. LIGO maintains a laser whose beam is split into two perpendicular tunnels and reflected back to a detector. A significant gravitational wave passing through space-time warps the tunnels separately, and the beams do not cancel out upon returning, thus registering the gravitational wave rippling through the universe through space-time. LIGO confirms the existence and impact of gravitational waves predicted by general relativity. The spatiotemporal fabric of the universal ecosystem is warped by gravity, and ecocriticism has a new image of nature to consider. I am not the first to invoke general relativity's description of the universe as literary theory. In Reading for the Wormholes, Microperiods from the Future, Linda Charnes asks, quote, "Is it possible to create a transmissible methodology out of reading for temporal wormholes?" Unquote. She considers Sight's alternative to cultural perspectives of time and conceptualizes literary moments termed wormholes. At these sites, the future seems to appear in the present in an attempt to develop readings that recognize interpretations supposedly blocked by historicism's method of relating the past and present. The article attempts to run, quote, time in the opposite direction to see if it is possible to detect the future in texts, unquote. This is engaging as a site of the paradigmatic circulation of general relativity in culture, although its metaphorical use of wormholes manifests as anachronistic thought that is less elegant than or already deploying the historical logic of linear, unidirectional time. Ecocriticism's diligent attention to scientific accuracy inoculates the literary theory against the metaphorical slippage at the core of Reading for the Wormholes. Ecocriticism does wonder what human relations to nature become when the environment is characterized as flexible space-time rippling with gravitational waves, when the detection of those waves verifies the model of the universe that also describes the viability of wormholes. Charnes uses wormhole to draw a line from present to the past as a loose concept to justify the act. The assertion invokes a non-existent gravitas, that of physical calculations and dimensional reality, to cultural intersections that function by the causal logic of history and culture, rather than the acausality so often associated with wormholes, the future altering the present. I am more detailed in the end of the Anthropocene, but ultimately I am not opposed to Reading for the Wormholes, Microperiods from the Future as a text itself, where the writer earnestly attempts to read in a post-general relativity paradigm, to think with spacetime and wormholes. What do literary criticism and history become if we ever find, utilize, or create an actual wormhole? To warp spacetime such that one arrives elsewhere in the universe or time, alters what it means to be Terran, and establishes a new biotic relationship to the universe. Utilizing wormholes is the sort of thing that could end the Astropocene. The last astropic act, bookending Watney's use of the Martian atmosphere to preserve his earthly circle of nature. On the cusp of the late-stage Anthropocene, though, we must sufficiently imagine biotic relations to the universal ecosystem for ecoethical progress into the Astropocene. Perhaps the 2016 confirmation of gravitational waves acts more like the historical wormhole Charnes means. Consider the anachronistic action in the cultural paradigm extending from the 1915 publication of general relativity along a continuum to whatever the Astropocene reveals about our biotic relation to spacetime. After 100 years of working as though gravitational waves ripple through spacetime, an experiment confirms it. The finding is principally as valuable as the theory. But after a century of other forms of validation, the authorization of general relativity by the experiment does not issue a paradigm in our temporal location, but rather affirms the paradigm that general relativity already issued. Arrival by Denis Villeneuve narratively realizes what Charnes wants to do. Aliens gift humans their semisiographic written language, which fundamentally expresses their cognitive and biotic relation to time. The main character becomes fluent, and by the principles that language constructs perspective, witnesses the future. In a lighthearted counterpoint, an episode of The Big Bang Theory, The Focus Attenuation, investigates the grammar of time travel for discussing Back to the Future. Quote, is placed the right tense for something that would have happened in the future of a past that was affected by something from the future, unquote? The characters decide on, quote, had will have placed as the proper tense. Avengers: Infinity War describes how taking control of the very fabric of reality is the way one might resolve the ecological problems of exponential population increase in a finite system. The sequel, Avengers: Endgame, discards a discussion of composting because the techno-savior figured out time travel, so they just use that. The film also takes the time to clarify the actual structure of time, as opposed to that propagated by time travel movies like Back to the Future. These are all iterations of the general relativity paradigm circulating in culture. The Astropocene makes nature spatiotemporal and increasingly experienced by total Terrans. This train of thought prepares ecocriticism to end the Anthropocene, focusing on its ability to reflect on biotic Terrans in spatiotemporal nature, and thus shape the cultural expression of that identity for the Astropocene. We are already entrenched in spatiotemporal environs. Biotic relations are mathematical and fleshy now, and biotic identity is soon to be contoured by interrelation with the universal ecosystem. Ecocritical methodology circulates the information necessary to foresee and curate the Astropocene. Ecocriticism can be the next paradigmatic perspective, ending this epoch and shaping the next. We are on the cusp of the late-stage Anthropocene, that time when we will cease to simply impact our planet and will begin to control the anthroposphere's output. This decision will directly impact, if not exactly become, how we comport ourselves on other planets. Ecocritically interrogating the end of the Anthropocene and characterizing the Astropocene offers us a biotic identity that can be used now to construct an ecoethical ontology that shapes our imminent control over anthropogenic impact on this planet and in the wilds beyond. Thank you.